This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today I get to be an English nerd with the English nerd as we talk about metaphors and analogies. So, why don't you join us? Okay, so I am super thrilled to be able to invite the English nerd to our channel here today, and that is Carly Stevens. I'm thrilled that you actually were willing to join us here today. But rather than have me introduce you, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you do a lot of things and a lot of cool things, and I'm just thrilled that you're here to talk to us about metaphors here today.
Yeah, well, I'm super happy to be here as well. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, so I'm Carly Stevens. I have been a teacher for 10 years. I teach 10th grade and AP, and more recently I've become an author as well, a published author. Specifically, my series is the 10-Year Academy series. Firian Rising is the first book. And basically, it's a dark young adult fantasy about a guy who gets into an elite academy of mental warriors and is willing to do anything and everything to become the best. So what is he willing to sacrifice for that? At first, it seems like kind of a straightforward chosen one romance kind of story, but hang on to your hats. It's a twisty kind of thing. So if you like Shadow and Bone, then this is a great series to check out. But that's just a little bit about me, an English teacher, and of course I have a YouTube channel, English Nerd, as well, which talks about both English class kinds of things and writing as well. So that's me.
Awesome. And, I will make sure to put all the links to contact Curly right down below so that you can actually make sure that you can reach out to her and hit her with all of your author questions because, I might have produced a textbook, but I've never written a novel or anything like that, nor would I, by the way. I am a terrible fiction writer. I took some fiction writing in college and I can do the fiction analysis like we're going to do in just a minute, but the fiction writing for me, oh my gosh, just bad.
I could help you, Tim.
Right. I need all the help I can get. Now, actually, one quick question about your book series before we move on. How many books are in it?
There are two out right now. The third one, so it's Firian Rising is the first one. Into the Unreal is the second, and the third and last book in the series is coming out on July 6th.
Okay, so that's coming this year.
Yeah, it's coming this year. So cool the first early readers have finished it, and the feedback is that it's by far the best one, and I'm so excited.
That is exciting. That's excellent. And so we're going to talk about metaphor now here today. But before I do, actually, another question just popped in my mind.
Sure.
What's your favorite fantasy series of all time?
That's a horrible and mean question that I was not prepared for. Lord of the Rings got me into it. I have a huge soft spot for Lord of the Rings, but I've since read so many other series. Gosh, the Lunar Chronicles. I know it's sci-fi, but it really is fantasy. By Marissa Meyer is one of my new favorites. Gosh, there are too many good ones to choose from. I'm just going to leave it at that and say that those are two of my favorites.
Gotcha. There it is. That's perfect. Right. Excellent. So speaking of sci-fi, though, we're going to use some Ray Bradbury here today, and then we're going to actually use some of your work as well. But we're going to talk about metaphor and the complexity of metaphor and trying to get past that initial layer of comparison to get a little bit more out. So we're going to start with an excerpt from a short story from called All Summer in a Day. It's by Ray Bradbury, who's actually one of my most favorite novelists at all, ever.
He's incredible.
I know, honestly. And I'm going to read this here, and we're going to talk about metaphor. And when we do, we'll make sure that we have a common definition because you and I have talked about the difference of how we interpret metaphor anyway. And then we'll actually get into it. So here we go. We have this excerpt is from a story about a class of children on Venus, which is in this tale is a jungle world of constant torrential rainstorms, where the sun is only visible for 2 hours every 7 years. In this selection, the children have just emerged from their cramped gray underground shelters that echo the deafening rain. The sun has just arrived. So we've got some nice context here for any student or anybody who's watching this that's never read this before. But let's check out what it says. It says, the children lay out laughing on the jungle mattress and heard it sigh and squeak under them, resilient and alive. They ran among the trees, they slipped and fell, they pushed each other, they played hide and seek and tag, but most of all, they squinted at the sun until the tears ran down their faces. They put their hands up to that yellowness and that amazing blueness, and they breathed of the fresh, fresh air and listened to the silence which suspended them in a blessed sea of no sound and no motion. They looked at everything and savored everything. Then, wildly, like animals escaped from their caves, they ran in shouting circles. They ran for an hour and did not stop running. So this is clearly one of the most invigorating passages in this excerpt. And we actually have two metaphors here, but when we talk about the second one, we're going to want to change up our language a little bit. So first of all, right, Carly, right, when we talk about metaphors on the basis, what are we talking about?
So a metaphor is just an analogy between two unlike things. The way that I teach it is it's kind of an umbrella term when you don't use like or as. That would be more of a simile, but personification and conceits and a lot of other stuff falls under the metaphor kind of umbrella. But I understand that you have a slightly broader definition of metaphor.
Yeah, right. And so, it's nice because, even these terms amongst English teachers with much of experience can be, kind of broadly defined. So in my classroom, I always present the idea of the metaphor as being a comparison of two unlike things, right? And I will tell students, right, what if I told you, we have one of those Neo moments from the Matrix. What if I told you, right? I'm like, what if I told you a simile as a metaphor? And my kids, it looks like their brains explode. They're like, no, it's a simile, right? And I'm like, well, if a metaphor is a comparison of two unlike things, then a simile is just a type of metaphor. And then when you think about all those other things that deal with comparison in literature, you're right. Personification fits right into that. And I actually put symbolism in that category as well, because how can you tell if something's a symbol? You just create a T-chart, and if the idea of what it symbolizes compares to the physical character traits, you've got a comparison between there.
Right, it essentially is a metaphor.
Right. And so because of that, our definitions aren't too off, but I know that we're going to talk about the Jungle Mattress here in this. And then when we scroll down, this one, obviously, because it has the word like, is a simile, right? But I would just put it under that kind of umbrella. And the other thing that I do in my classroom when I talk about this kind of thing is I always tell my students that English is like nesting dolls, not like boxes. We want to put things in the symbolism box, in the personification box, in the metaphor box. And I'm like, well, it can be in its own box. That's fine. But it can also be all kind of combined together. So if I have a nesting doll, I've got one doll that has 8 dolls in it. So I ask my students, I'm like, is it 8 dolls or is it 1? And then some of them say 8, some say 1. And I'm like, it's both. It's a nesting doll, singular, that has all of them in it. And so I think that's kind of what's going on here with both yours and my definition of metaphor as we look at this. So anyway, we've got this initial comparison of the Jungle Mattress here for these kids. And what, if we were thinking like your students, what's the initial comparison that they're going to create? They're going to notice the metaphor. What's the first thing they're going to connect it to that might not be super insightful, but it's like, okay, they get the metaphor. What do you think would be where they begin?
Yeah, so on the Jungle Mattress, they would of course notice that is a metaphor and would probably talk about the positive connotation of that, how a mattress is something that is comfortable, something that's, desirable or restful, something like that. So those would probably be the first kind of associations that they would make with that idea.
And, and I don't think that that's something that we should, to tell kids is wrong, right? But we want to try to get to the complexity of the metaphor here, right? And so now what I need to get my kids to be able to do is realize that the mattress does have that sense of comfort there. So it's like, okay, so the kids are kind of comfortable when they go outside. But, that's kind of forgetting, right, this idea of the jungle here, right? And so we've got the mattress side, but we want to get the kids to say, look at the whole picture, right? And now what about the jungle? When we connect it to that jungle, what does the jungle bring in for us here?
So jungle gives us more of that sense of wildness, of the unknown. So mattress is positive, is comfortable, but the jungle is it's a juxtaposition of not the unknown and more wild. So it's not a mattress to sleep on necessarily. It's more of a mattress to jump on. That's
right. Right. Absolutely. absolutely. And, with that unknown, and, the jungle can be a place that's considered remarkably dangerous. And I think that the mattress is really there to help get past this idea of the danger of the jungle, but keep the unknown of the jungle. So now we have this kind of comfortable and playful unknown as opposed to a dangerous unknown. And I think that a lot of times, if your students are anything like mine, my kids will get the mattress part right away and be like, "Oh, okay, hey, like you had mentioned, it's kind of comfortable here." And now we actually want to look at the mattress as being not a mattress to sleep on, but a mattress to jump on, and doing it in the jungle where it's the unknown, but it's not. It's excuse me, it's not the dangerous unknown that we would typically associate with the jaguar or with whatever else could be lurking in behind all the leaves and all the fog and whatnot.
Right. It's more the adventurous, like, Indiana Jones, if you didn't have Nazis after you kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And now all of a sudden it's like, what can we go do and explore? So this metaphor right here, think about what Carly and I were just talking about, right? We've already gotten to the depths there by really looking at the juxtaposition and looking at the word connotations, right? What do we have for the jungle? And then when we look at the connotations here, we can actually eliminate some of the connotations that we bring to it, right? The mattress, not comfortable. That's not the one that we're looking at right now. It's a comfortable play toy, not a comfortable sleep element, right? Or a piece of furniture. The jungle, right? Not scary, but still unknown. And so that's why this metaphor is so rich and so important, because we can then say, with the juxtaposition of these two terms, we can get rid of some of the negative connotations or inaccurate connotations that are applied at that time. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's our metaphor. Let's actually shift down to the complexity of our simile here. So we've got these kids, and now they're wildly like animals escaping from their caves. Let's try to do the same thing. What do you think your kids are initially going to pick up on? And then let's try to dig a little deeper together here.
Yeah, so like animals escaped from their caves, it gives us more of a visual of how feral and wild these kids are as they're running out into the new sunlight that they're not used to. That's probably just that's probably where they'd
they're going to be
just to kind of develop the image of it.
Right, the image of that kind of being wild here, right? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because of course on the surface that's what we want them to get to, this kind of wild, uncontrollable kind of moment here. And the word wildly is helping, and also the idea of the escaped is helping, But notice when we start to dig deeper here, right, with our kids, I think that we're going to actually focus on these particular words. The animal can bring out the wild element here, but I think if we really focus on escape and cave, we're going to be able to get these kids to get a much deeper understanding, or our students, I should say, to have a much deeper understanding. So if you actually were to hone in on the word escape with your kids, what would you try to bring out for the simile for them with that?
So escape, if you focus on escape, then it sounds like you're going from something less desirable to more desirable, of course. Otherwise, why would you want to escape? So it emphasizes how gray and in some ways negative their existence was before this moment. So they want to, go out into something that's better than what their normal lives are.
Yep.
And then as far as caves go, not all animals live in caves. Some do, and caves have a few different ideas associated with them. So there could be hibernation. Some animals kind of hibernate in caves and don't really live so much as just sort of sleep, right. Which I think is probably relevant here. And then also caves are just very dull and made of, gray rock and, are kind of hard and uncomfortable versus the more comfortable freedom, I guess, like the jungle mattress of going outside.
And also look at the colors that are given up here, that yellowness, that blueness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that contrast to the idea of the cave. But also if we look back at the kind of excerpt up top here, they've got their gray underground shelters that are having that deafening rain and whatnot, and they're cramped. So now the cave also becomes a cramped gray underground type of association. And now,
right, claustrophobic almost.
Right. And so, when we look at the initial simile, where I think most of our kids typically are, is, he uses the word animals to showcase that they're wild, right? when we get into, all right, well, let's get deeper. Let's add more to those layers again. Let's look at what animals are. Let's look at the other language that animals is placed next to. And escape in caves, I think, are what's definitely so important here, as you brought up for us so delightfully. So thank you so much for that. Now, the reason why I also wanted to bring you on, though, Carly, is because in my classroom, students ask me all the time, we'll do a little metaphor analysis like this for Bradbury, and students would be like, did Bradbury really mean to do that? Did the author know like he or she was doing that? And I was like, what a better way to actually answer that question than to get a published author, right, with some novels on the Garden of English. So I have right here, right, a passage from your first book, right, from Firian Rising, and I can't believe it. I didn't italicize that. My students would kill me if I.
Well, you fixed it, so it's fine.
There we go, right? We fixed it on the spot. But anyway, so we've got this passage here, and why don't you give us a little bit of context? And I'm going to then ask you, okay, did you mean to do this? Did you mean to do this? And then try to bring us through your thought process as how you were developing your metaphor so we can finally answer that age-old question. Does the author mean to do these things?
So the context is that Firian, who's the he in this particular passage, is about to murder someone. And it's mostly for his own ambition, although he feels like there are some legitimate reasons to do it. So he's kind of at war with himself. On the one hand, he feels like, yes, this is the right thing to do for me, but also on the other hand, there's part of him that also knows that he's going too far. And so he's poised right before actually taking action in this particular passage.
So why don't you actually read the passage for us too, if you don't mind, just because it's always best. Like for me, whenever I have the opportunity to hear the author read his or her work, I'm like, this is perfect because this is how the author wants it read. However, I will say this though. I don't know if you've ever listened to the audio recording of the William Golding book. Lord of the Flies, right? William Golding actually reads Lord of the Flies, and his
really?
recording is awful. Like I'm like,
it's kind of like T.S. Eliot. Have you heard T.S. Eliot read his stuff?
But only Proofrock once.
Oh, it's gosh awful. It's so bad.
So anyway, right? I doubt that would be the case here. Why don't you read the passage for us here and then talk to us about the kind of metaphor development and the thought process that went into it while you were going through this?
Okay, I'll do my best. As he stood in the dark, the expanse of open air washed around him, feeling more unreal than the space where they were about to fight. The quiet, too. It was as though the darkness washing against him in its cavernous silence pressed him up against the wall where he stood, listening. Blood churned in his ears. His neck bones creaked. All
right. Now I'm getting ready to experience a murder here. This is
Yeah. Yeah, just a tiny bit more context so that the first sentence makes sense. Feeling more unreal than the space where they were about to fight. The mental warfare, there's kind of this alternate dimension, essentially, that they can go into. It's called the unreal. Yeah. And so that's sort of how they're, like, the method that they're going to use to kill the guy. So anyway.
All right. So, all right, walk us through the metaphor development here and the thought process that went through that so we can now assuredly say, yes, the authors do, think about these things.
Yeah. So for this, I wanted to get a Crime and Punishment vibe as, Raskolnikov is going to murder the old woman. There's that sense of fate. So I wanted to get in that same kind of hyper awareness of moment to moment experience, but also the conflict within, as far as he wants to kill the guy, but feels like it's probably wrong. So one way that I got that across was in that idea of the darkness behind him being so much bigger than he is, because on the one hand, having that large darkness, washing up against him, pressing him up against the wall, washing around him, that sort of thing, it makes him seem a lot smaller than the darkness itself. And that works on a couple of levels. Kind of the darkness within him is the biggest part of him in this section. And it also it makes him seem small. So the part of him that knows that this is wrong feels kind of, stressed and diminished and vulnerable. Yeah. if there's all this huge darkness behind you, that makes you feel small and vulnerable. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I was going for here.
Right, and as opposed to students recognizing this kind of the darkness washing, that's sort of a moment. And they're like, okay, so we've got personification, and now when we get to the why here, when we think about the contextuality, if that's even a word, right, of it, the context of it, it can really help get to that layered moment of that kind of how does this actually correlate as a metaphor for something bigger going on, even in our main character's mind, and that actually then relates to characterization. So now we've got some extra complexity here that's very similar to what's going on up top here, where this characterizes the kids as not only being wild but feeling as if they're escaping, like they're free, and that then influences their actions even more. So the metaphor itself actually relates to characterization on top of that, and we start seeing how things in literature can be interconnected and in their complexity.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the best ways I think to both analyze metaphor and the way that I like to use it is to reveal character. To associate things with what the characters are used to thinking about, or what their background is, or just to reveal something about them. Another, as I'm looking back at this, I've published this about a year and a half ago, so it's been a second. But as I'm looking back at this, the word "washed" coming up a couple of times, that idea of water, that's a really common way that I'll describe going into that second dimension as well, kind of diving in as though it's water. And here he feels almost as though his experience is kind of unreal. It's almost like that more mental sort of dimension. And so having similar language, I'll be honest, I don't think was my plan, but subconsciously it makes a lot of sense, since the language is almost identical here as it would be for some of his experiences in that more mental dimension.
So
that makes sense.
That answers another part of the question, though, when we provide literary analysis, is that it's about interpretation as well. And even you just mentioned this idea of, as being an author, sometimes we subconsciously do things that kind of show up after. So we're like, this was purposeful, but oh my word, look at that other correlation. But if somebody else finds a correlation and it becomes extremely plausible and argumentatively plausible, then that interpretation can actually be considered quite accurate. Which is important for students to know as well. One last thing that I just want to mention before we finish out here today is that in order to really look at metaphors and really pull out their complexity is, in our entire conversation, we talked a lot about word connotations.
Mm-hmm.
What are the connotations of the words that we're connecting to something bigger? And that's how metaphor and complexity really, really seems to work. So, Carly, once again, I want to thank you for showing up and actually sharing a little bit of your work with us. And that will be linked down below as well, right? Carly does have her channel, The English Nerd. That'll be linked down below. We asked you to check her out as well. So thank you so much for showing up. If this video was helpful for anybody that's watching, by all means, please click like and subscribe. That's the easiest way to help the Garden of English. Please note we've got a bunch of affiliate links down below. And we are active on social media. Carly, are you active on social media? You have like a Twitter or a Facebook or Instagram or anything like that?
So besides my YouTube channel, I do have an Instagram. It's Carly Stevens Books.
Right, and that's actually where we reached out originally to get in contact with you. So yeah, we will put all links to all that down there. So everybody, make sure you check out Carly. And it was an absolute pleasure to have you on here. Oh, by the way, one last thing I totally forgot. Right, the Garden of English greatly appreciates their Patreon supporters, and you can actually see their names like up, I don't know, like here right now. So thank you for your support as always. And we want to make sure that that's actually out there. So Carly, once again, thank you so much. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, my pleasure.